Imagine you are a billionaire. You have just paid $50 million for a 1 week vacation in low Earth orbit. You check into your beautiful, futuristic suite aboard a commercial space station. Suddenly, the emergency alarm blares. You need to evacuate to the escape capsule. But there is a massive problem. You are floating in zero gravity, so you don't know which way is up. The smoke from the fire isn't rising to the ceiling because in space, heat doesn't rise. And because of the lack of gravity, the fluid in your skull has shifted, making your vision incredibly blurry. How on Earth, or rather off Earth, do you read a sign to find your way out? Today we are exploring the absolute bleeding edge of wayfinding graphic design. How engineers and designers are inventing the first signage systems for commercial space hotels. On Earth, every single sign you have ever read relies on one invisible, fundamental law of physics: gravity. Gravity tells us where the floor is, where the ceiling is, and which way the text should face. But when you cross the Kármán line and enter microgravity, the rules of typography completely disintegrate. Right now, as we push into the late 2020s, a massive commercial space race is happening. Companies like Vast, Axiom Space, and Blue Origin's Orbital Reef are actively building the first commercial space stations, essentially orbiting hotels and laboratories intended to replace the International Space Station. But designing the interior of these habitats has created a massive headache for wayfinding designers. In a normal hotel, you put a room number sign on the wall at eye level, roughly 60 inches off the floor. But in a microgravity space habitat, there is no floor. A space tourist might be floating horizontally, floating upside down, or pushing off the ceiling. If you mount a standard directional arrow pointing left, it is entirely useless to a person who is floating upside down. To them, the arrow is pointing right. To solve this, orbital designers have to completely abandon traditional floor-to-ceiling orientation. They rely on omnidirectional typography. Instead of relying on up and down, space station signage uses absolute structural vectors, usually the X, Y, and Z axes of the station's cylinder. If you look at the interior mock-ups for upcoming commercial stations, you will notice heavy color coding. In the ISS, the walls, ceiling, and deck are often color-coded so astronauts can subconsciously orient themselves. Commercial habitats take this further. A single directional sign might feature text printed in a circular, 360-degree radial layout, ensuring that no matter which physical angle your body is floating at, a portion of the text is perfectly right side up. Furthermore, directional arrows are being replaced by what designers call flow gradients. Instead of a static arrow that can be misread if you are upside down, the walls feature long, continuous graphical stripes that fade from dark to light. The rule is simple: you always follow the gradient from light to dark to reach the central docking hub. It works regardless of your physical orientation, completely bypassing the need for a traditional arrow. If you are designing a high-end luxury hotel on Earth, you assume your guests can read your beautiful, custom-designed room signs. But in space, the human body actively rebels against graphic design. Within 48 hours of reaching orbit, your guests might literally lose their ability to read. In microgravity, the human body undergoes a terrifying biological shift. On Earth, gravity constantly pulls your bodily fluids down into your legs. But in space without gravity, approximately 2 liters of fluid shift upward into your chest and head. This is affectionately called puffy face bird legs syndrome. But this fluid shift creates a very serious medical condition known as SANS, spaceflight associated neuroocular syndrome. The increased fluid pressure inside the skull literally pushes against the back of the eyeball. It physically flattens the eyeball and swells the optic nerve. Because of this, perfectly healthy astronauts often become farsighted in space. Their vision gets incredibly blurry. On the ISS, NASA literally keeps a stash of space glasses of varying prescriptions because astronauts' vision degrades so rapidly they can no longer read the digital control panels or printed warning labels. If you are operating a commercial space hotel like Vast's Haven 1 or the Axiom Station, you are dealing with wealthy tourists who have never experienced this fluid shift before. If an emergency happens, you cannot rely on them being able to clearly read a glowing exit sign at the end of a module. Their flattened eyeballs simply might not be able to focus on it. The solution is tactile, haptic wayfinding. In microgravity, humans move by grabbing handrails. Your hands become your feet. Therefore, the handrail is the most important piece of real estate in the entire station. Space designers are turning the handrails themselves into the primary signage system. Instead of printing a sign on the wall, the vital wayfinding data is physically molded into the handholds using aggressive, high-relief tactile textures and space-rated braille. But they are taking it a step further with active haptics. If a decompression event occurs and a tourist needs to find the emergency safe haven, the handrails are programmed to physically vibrate. The vibration pulses directionally. Even if the guest is completely blinded by smoke or sands-induced blurriness, they simply grab the bar, feel the physical pulse traveling toward the right, and push themselves in that direction. The signage is no longer something you look at, it is something you feel. Let's talk about the scariest word in space: fire. On Earth, a fire alarm triggers a very predictable human response based on physics, but in orbit, physics takes the day off. And because of that, every single fire exit sign you have ever seen is fundamentally broken. If a fire breaks out in a terrestrial hotel, the heat causes the air to expand and become less dense. Gravity pulls the colder, heavier air down, which forces the hot smoke up to the ceiling. This is called buoyancy-driven convection. Because we know smoke rises to the ceiling, we place our emergency photoluminescent exit signs down low, near the baseboards, so crawling humans can see them. But in microgravity, buoyancy does not exist. Hot air doesn't rise because there is no up. If a fire starts in a space station, the smoke does not bank at the ceiling. Instead, it forms a rapidly expanding, omnidirectional, dense, spherical cloud right in the middle of the room. It sticks to surfaces. It clings to the walls. Because of this horrifying physics quirk, low-level path markings, the glowing strips on the floor of airplanes and hotels, are useless. The smoke will obscure the floor just as fast as it obscures the ceiling. To design an evacuation system for a commercial space habitat, designers had to invent active chase lighting. Since static signs will be instantly swallowed by the spherical smoke clouds, the walls of modern orbital modules are embedded with high-intensity, multi-spectrum LED strips running along all four primary axes. What would traditionally be the floor, ceiling, and both walls. When the fire alarm triggers, these strips do not just light up. They create an aggressive, strobing, chase light effect, shooting away from the heat source and toward the emergency return vehicle. Because the LEDs are wrapped 360 degrees around the cylindrical module, even if the center of the room is a dense sphere of floating smoke, the flashing ambient light reflects off the edges of the module, creating a visual tunnel. You don't read a sign saying, "Exit." You simply hurl your body through the strobe light tunnel until the flashing stops. It is raw, psychological visual routing designed to override panic in a zero-gravity void. Designing a sign that looks good under normal indoor lighting is easy. But a commercial space station in low Earth orbit doesn't have normal lighting. It has the most aggressive, violent, and dynamic lighting environment in the known universe. A commercial space station in low Earth orbit travels at roughly 17,500 miles per hour. Because it is moving so incredibly fast, it orbits the entire planet once every 90 minutes. This means that space tourists will experience 16 blinding sunrises and 16 pitch-black sunsets every single 24-hour period. If you are a signage designer, this is your worst nightmare. Commercial stations like Orbital Reef and Axiom Station are boasting massive, expansive windows and cupolas so guests can look at the Earth. But when the station rotates into direct sunlight, the solar radiation is unfiltered by an atmosphere. The light is violently, blindingly bright. 45 minutes later, the station passes into the Earth's shadow, and the module plunges into absolute, inky darkness. If you print a beautiful luxury room number sign on a piece of glossy acrylic, like you would in a 5-star hotel on Earth, the blinding solar glare bouncing around the module will turn that sign into a completely illegible mirror. Worse, the extreme unfiltered ultraviolet radiation pouring through the windows will chemically degrade traditional inks, turning a beautiful sign into a faded, brittle piece of trash within months. To solve the glare problem, space signage must use ultra-matte, light-absorbing finishes. But to solve the day/night problem, the signs must be self-illuminating. Commercial habitats are utilizing advanced OLED, organic light-emitting diode films. These screens are thinner than a piece of paper and can be adhered directly to the curved interior walls of the pressure vessel. They are connected to the station's central ambient light sensors. When the station is in the 45-minute blinding daylight phase, the OLED signs crank their contrast to maximum, displaying deep, light-absorbing black typography on a bright background. But the moment the station crosses the terminator line into the dark side of the Earth, the signs instantly invert. The background goes black to reduce light pollution, and the typography glows with a soft amber luminescence. The signs are biologically synced to the station's orbital mechanics, constantly breathing and shifting contrast 16 times a day to remain perfectly legible. When you put wealthy tourists from America, Japan, France, and the UAE into a single metal tube in space, language becomes a barrier. You have to use pictograms. But what happens when the standard international symbol for a human being suddenly doesn't accurately represent what a human body looks like in space? On Earth, the International Organization for Standardization, ISO, governs emergency signs. ISO 7010 is the famous green running man sign. It shows a human standing upright on two legs striding forward. But in microgravity, humans do not stand upright. When you relax in 0G, your body naturally curls into a highly specific pose called the neutral body posture. Your knees float up to your chest, your arms hover in front of you like a zombie, and your neck tilts forward. You look like you are suspended in fluid. Space designers realize that using Earth-based pictograms creates cognitive dissonance. If you show a picture of a person standing firmly on a flat line to represent a bathroom, a space tourist's brain takes a fraction of a second longer to process it, because that geometry no longer exists in their physical reality. So, graphic designers for orbital habitats are actively reinventing the human pictogram. The new icons feature figures in the curved, fetal-like neutral body posture, pushing off walls with their hands rather than striding with their feet. It is a completely new visual language for a completely new species of human environment. But the ultimate restriction on space signage isn't language, or lighting, or gravity. It is the brutal economics of a rocket launch. Currently, it costs roughly $10,000 to launch a single kilogram of payload into low Earth orbit. If an interior designer specifies a heavy, luxurious, half-inch thick architectural bronze sign for a space hotel suite, the launch provider will laugh them out of the building. That sign alone might cost $50,000 just in rocket fuel to get it to orbit. In space, mass is the enemy. Therefore, signage can no longer be a separate physical object bolted to a wall. It has to be completely weightless, or it has to serve double duty. This is why the interior walls of modules like Vast's Haven 1 are lined with soft, padded, fire-retardant Nomex and Kevlar fabrics. These fabrics serve as acoustic dampening to absorb the roaring sound of the life support fans, and they act as crash pads for clumsy tourists floating into the walls. Instead of manufacturing heavy plastic signs, the graphics, room numbers, and wayfinding arrows are heavily dye-sublimated directly into the acoustic fabric. The signage literally weighs nothing. The building material is the sign. It is the ultimate expression of minimalist design, forced by the ruthless financial math of rocket science. When we look up at the night sky and think about the future of commercial space travel, we usually think about massive rockets, cutting-edge thrusters, and zero-gravity tourism. We almost never think about the graphic designers. But as we transition from highly trained astronauts to civilian space tourists, the most dangerous thing in orbit isn't the vacuum of space. It is human confusion. The designers building these first orbital hotels are writing the rule book from scratch. They are battling fluid shifts that blind their guests. They are fighting smoke that doesn't rise. They are syncing typography to the speed of the sun, and inventing a brand new visual language for a body that no longer feels the pull of the Earth. The signs they are designing today won't just be used on the commercial space stations of 2026 and 2027, they will set the standard for the lunar bases of the 2030s and the Martian colonies of the future. Thank you so much for watching. If you want to keep exploring the invisible, high-stakes design that runs our world and beyond, make sure to hit that subscribe button. Let me know in the comments. If you had $50 million, would you spend it on a vacation to a commercial space station? See you in the next video.